Here is the answer to last video's challenge question. Last time we saw that severely Tadakawa played bishop takes b8, taking the knight on b8, thinking he could win a piece. His idea was that if the rook take on b8, then the queen would come to a4 and fork the king and the bishop. And if black saved his bishop, for example with a5, then white would simply retreat his bishop. But Capablanca found an in-between move that saved everything, and I hope you found it as well. The move was knight to d5. But what does this move do? Well, firstly, it guards this bishop, so if that bishop doesn't move out, well, we're gonna take it. But also, black is also threatening to play knight to e3 check, which is a clear fork of the king and the queen. So, what could Tadakawa do? Well, if the smart ones out there, you might have found that bishop f4 saves everything. Saves the bishop, and what it also does is that it guards the e3 square, so the fork is no longer able to be performed. And also he was thinking that if Tadakawa played bishop takes f4, then white would just simply move his queen to a5 and the fork would be back. But Capablanca played yet another in-between move. This time it was queen to f6. Now this one might be even deadlier than the last one, because it pins the bishop to the king, and guess what? Since this bishop is pinned, it does not protect any squares, so the fork on e3 is back. And white has so much things to worry about that he resigned. Today I will be covering Zugzwangs, and as always I will be giving you an end of video challenge question. A Zugzwang is when it's one person's move and they only have bad moves to do, but the bad moves are forced. See, in this example, it is black's move, and guess what? He is in Zugzwang. And why is that? It's because he has literally no good moves to do. Here are his only legal moves: knight to f7, rook to any of these squares, and bishop to these squares. And what do those moves all have in common? Well, they're all super bad moves. For example, take knight to f7. White can easily just take with the bishop or the rook. Any would be fine. And notice that this pawn is blocking the knight. Now what about this bishop? Well, if he goes here, he's just waiting to be eaten by any of these pawns. And then if he takes on f3, there's a g2 pawn here waiting. And the rook. If it goes here, obviously the king can take. Same with here. But what about a2? Well, if you had good eyes, you would have realized that this bishop on g8 was spying on this rook the whole time, waiting for it to land there. And so, in this position, we can clearly tell it is a Zugzwang. Black, it is his move, and he is forced to do a bad move. There is no other move that he can play. Notice that these pawns are blocking these pawns so that they can't move, and these pawns are blocking these pieces to force them to only be able to do bad moves. And notice this rook on here, which is super annoying, blocking all the king's moves, and it's guarded by the pawn. Now, I will be showing you another example of a Zugzwang. In this position, it is white's move to play, and he can play one move that can put black into Zugzwang. Can you find it? I hope that you found king to f5. What this move does is that it protects this pawn, and it attacks this pawn, and it forces black's king to move to one of these squares. But what if he moves to any of these squares, he loses. But why? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Let's just say he moves to c5. Now, before when he was on d4, he was guarding this pawn. But since he's moved away, we can easily just take. Now, can you see that this pawn, these two squares are the only two squares where the black king can go to keep on protecting the pawn. But the problem for black is that those two squares are both defended. The king is defending this pawn and the pawn is guarding the square. Therefore, black must ruin his position by playing one of these squares, and therefore he's in Zugzwang. But this position is very special as whoever's turn to move loses. Whoever's move it is loses. Because, for example, instead, if it was white's move, he would lose. Let me show you an example of that. In this position, it is black's move. And let's say he learned what Zugzwang is, and he knows to play king to d4, which puts white in Zugzwang. And notice this was the same position as last one, except that it is white's turn to move. Now, wherever he moves, he will definitely lose this pawn. This pawn. And then, after a few moves, this pawn will most certainly promote, and white will be completely lost. Now, we have a name for this type of Zugzwang. It's called mutual Zugzwang. It's where in a position, whoever's move it is, whoever moves will lose. Like you saw, when black moved, he lost his pawn. And let's just say white moved to g4. Then he will lose this pawn. So, as you can see, mutual Zugzwang, as you can see, endgame technique is very important, as if you were white in this position, you would most certainly lose. Same with black. If he had calculated just one move incorrect, then he would be lost as well. Now I will be giving you the end of video challenge question, which as always will be resolved in the next video. In this position, you are white, and you have one move to play that will put black in Zugzwang. Now I want you to notice a few things. This bishop is completely trapped here on h1, and these pawns are all blocked. This king also can't move. And there is only this knight that has a few squares to go to. Now, what move can you play that will put black into Zugzwang? And then, can you find how white can win? The answer, like I said, will be in the next video. That's it for today, and thank you for your time. If you enjoyed the content, please consider to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you.